I have today with me, to my furthest, Professor Miha Kovač from the Ljubljana University, the Book Publishing, Media and Information Science Department, author of 4 books and even more articles on reading and book publishing. His most recent article on democracy and reading was one of the most downloaded articles in the history of Eurozine magazine that perhaps some of you know very well. It's been around for like 30 years. So I deeply recommend his work on reading. He's also the co-author of the already notorious Manifesto on Reading from the Slovenian Guest of Honor program 2 years ago in Frankfurt. Anja Kamenarič, a junior researcher, again from the University of Ljubljana. She is writing her PhD on AI in translations and the role and how it's going to change the world we live in, because we are the publishing world we live in. I myself here, I wore at least 3 hats, but for this first panel, I wore the hat of being part of the translation report, a research team that we will present to you in a while. Before doing so, however, I'd like to, yes, there is a 4th person who is missing. He's not on stage. Rüdiger Wischenbart of the content and consulting company in Austria, who is actually the initiator, the heart, and the energy booster behind the translation report series since 2008. So I guess if you're looking at us, you can also imagine Rüdiger being here. He's the elephant in the rooms. I'll try to pretend to be him in a way. This team here, plus some other people, for already, I'm afraid, 20 years now, we've been trying to monitor translation trends across Europe in both big and small markets, what is called big and small, and trying to see how do they changes, the digital shifts and the changes in the way books are produced, marketed, and consumed or read by readers. How does that affect the translation landscape? And of course, these are huge questions. I don't think we're going to be able to answer them today in this presentation or even in the forthcoming translation reports. But at least let's try to begin to answer them. And what I think it's interesting about our approach, at least for me, I hope for you as well, is that we are trying to check, to find hard data and to fact check some assumptions that we all have about translations. For example, what is center and what is periphery. In the sociology of translations, ever since the 90s, these concepts have been used widely to designate, broadly speaking, countries that import more than they export, vis-a-vis countries and languages that export more than they import. So ever since 2008, we've been preoccupied in the various editions, the 6th editions, Miha, perhaps, I forgot, maybe 6 editions of the diversity report. We've been dealing with these questions that you see here, and I will very briefly, with your permission, just walk you through what is behind those, and just offer you some perhaps curiosity facts of what we found throughout the years, because altogether this is like 500 pages that I bet you're not gonna read. We've been monitoring translation flows based on the Index Translationum data. That was the UNESCO huge database of translations that UNESCO ceased to maintain in the early 2000s. It was based on data submitted by the national libraries, and with all its imperfections, still it was a really interesting corpus of data from all over the world, this being UNESCO. So when UNESCO stopped doing that, we took over our shoulders, our fragile shoulders, the task to collect translation data from around European markets. We were able to establish the growth of translations overall since the 60s of the last century. The gradual growth of translations, the share of English, of course, as a source language that we know of, ranging from 40% in some countries to up to 70% in some countries of all translations altogether. We tracked how gradually Central and East European translations, how they disappeared totally with the fall of the Iron Curtain. And throughout the 90s, there was very little communication between the Central and Eastern European countries, and then there was a gradual rise after the year 2000. We also looked at the market performance of translations to question some of the biases or unreflected assumptions that we all have about bestsellers, of how this is all dominated by, bluntly, American trash. And to see how diverse the European markets are when it comes to the top market segment. We were looking at the top 10, the top 30, and even the top 100 bestsellers in certain countries. As you can imagine, for those of us coming from Central and Eastern Europe, the statistics here is highly questionable. So we haven't included Bulgaria, for example, in that monitoring. What we found, again, very quickly, that the top 20 bestsellers across the different markets are actually not dominated by American trash. There is, roughly speaking, a ratio between 1/3 English bestsellers, English language translations, 1/3 domestic authors. And here it's very interesting that some markets like Sweden and Netherlands were showing a very strong, much stronger preferences towards domestic authors in the market than others. And a bit less than 1/3 other languages translations. I'm missing anything for the bestsellers. Yeah, we try to track some certain authors' careers and what factors affected their career in translations. For example, we were tracking the first wave of Central and East European authors in translations, the generation of Nadaš, Esterházy, Drago Jančar, Staszuk, etc., and how they penetrated other bigger markets gradually, and what factors actually were at play in that career path. We try to track the phenomenon of exotic English writing authors like Arundhati Roy, Aravind Agida, who else? Khaled Hosseini, and their road to skyrocketing, including in sales, in various languages across Europe. Yes, I personally looked, but that's a curiosity fact, and I'll skip it. I personally looked at the factors that affected the career of Gospodinov and Gotze Smilevsky, two authors from that sort of appeared on the scene around 20 years ago from Macedonia and from Bulgaria, respectively, and how different being picked up by different publishers in, for example, France or Germany or Austria, how does that affect their further spread in translation? We researched the so-called digital ecosystem and how different how the digital shift affects translations across Europe as well. So phenomenon, for example, like books being becoming bestsellers only after, of course, they're serialized, they are picked up by Netflix or HBO, or books based on games, and all these cross-media relations in the entertainment and how they affect the popularity of certain titles in translation in other languages. Of course, we were there, so to speak, when initiatives like Amazon Crossing or Kindle Direct or Wattpad were born and started affecting our choices as publishers, our life as readers, and objects to aggressive marketing. Since 2008, we've been also tracking the role of national and European cultural policies because these non-market players do play a role in translation flows and the whole landscape across Europe, but this is something that I will be talking about tomorrow morning, I think, more in depth, because this is my topic in the report. Anja Kamenarič of the Ljubljana University will walk us through some of the findings. She's our guru of Excel tables and statistics. Some of the findings of the current translation report that will be released towards the end of the year. So, Anja, the floor is yours. And towards the end of the session, if there is time, I'll of course open the floor for questions, comments, and criticism. So keep them for the end, please.
Thank you very much. Oh, and thank you for the little remote. Oh, okay, so it moved. Okay, so like Yana so kindly said, I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about the numbers, the data, the things, the trends that we found out in this report. But don't worry, there are graphs on the slides, there's no complex equations, I'm not gonna make you suffer through statistics. But before we can go into really everything that we encompassed, we have to touch on sort of the latest trends that make finding this data particularly difficult, the things that we can't really track the way that we would like to. So the first thing I want to talk about is self-publishing. Sometimes we sort of push it aside a little bit. It's not a part of the traditional publishing. It's not as big of a part. But it has a huge role. If you look at the US numbers, for instance, the Kindle Direct payouts. Everything okay? Yeah. Okay. They rose from 2019 to 2023. It went from about 300 million to 575 million. In terms of ISBN numbers for the US, Bauer registered about 500,000 ISBNs in 2015, and then it rose with self-publishing to about 4.5 million in 2019. And of course, there were crashes after the pandemic, so now it's about steady about 2.5 million. But it shows how important self-publishing has become, what a big part it is. And the issue for reports like ours is we can't really track it. Now, in terms of American markets, that's not really our problem. But with Europe, it can be quite an issue. See, in Slovenia, for instance, we have this author, Kaja Bucic-Valpetic. And she writes this very sort of niche romance. It's sort of a vampire romance, magic romance, fantasy romance. And for the longest time, nobody even knew that she was Zoe Ashwood, as she's known to the international audiences. Which means that for years, whenever we were sort of counting the books, the statistics, the most read Slovenian authors, she fell through the cracks because she publishes in English under a pseudonym on Amazon. So she's a really good example on how self-publishing can work for small market authors, but she also shows how you can have a bunch of best-selling authors or very well-read authors that you don't even know about in your country. So that's a very particular blind spot. And it connects also to streaming, of course, and platformization. Now, in the report, we go a little bit more in depth into, of course, Kindle Direct, Spotify, Storytel, Tonybox, 11 Books, all of that. And essentially, it shows what these major players can do. Because let's face it, it's coming to the point where traditional reading has quite a lot of competition, as already Alma said earlier. It's all about entertainment. And readers are now reading books in different formats for different content. For instance, you know, romance book on the train in an ebook, then a certain scientific book in the traditional form, and an audiobook when you're cleaning something. And you can do that for the same book or for separate content. But everything that we read through this platform is, of course, influenced by these algorithms that aren't really exactly clear. There's no real regulatory framework that decides what can and can't be done with these platforms. So they can suggest English books to readers, they can push AI translations, as you're going to hear about more, and they can even suggest what type of books, of course, become bestsellers in countries. So when we're talking, again, about these numbers, we have to just take into account everything that we can't catch. But for what we looked at in this report, we divided our data into two parts: the publisher's data and the library data. Now, the publisher's data comes from trade organizations, publishers associations from various countries. And that sounds very simple, because surely they all have the same system, right? They count their books and they give us their data, and we're good. Not even a little bit. See, the thing is, each country, as you probably know, has their own little definition of what they count as a book or how they count it. For instance, if you're going by tax numbers, by tax codes for Sweden or France or UK, you immediately bump into trouble because they count newspapers and magazines. Or in Bulgaria here, when we looked at the National Statistical Institute that has all that data, they count books and they count pamphlets, or both together. But everything that counts as a pamphlet is under 48 pages. So we had that discussion, do we just take the books, because pamphlets don't really count, but if it's under 48 pages, that means that all children's picture books are immediately cut out of the data. So what we did was we had to count the pamphlets in as well, because we couldn't just ignore such a big part of the book market. And of course, metadata inconsistencies even trouble Nielsen and similar organizations, because whilst you do have the Onyx system, where each publisher is supposed to register what is a translation, what isn't a translation, they don't always register that, because I'm guessing they just don't feel like doing it. They don't see the value in putting that information in there. And then when we try to look at the data, it's not fully reliable. So that's some of the issues that we have. And with library data, again, seems very clean. You know, just about every country in Europe has that whole national library system where you have to input a certain number of copies to your national library so that future generations can see what we read, judge us for our taste, etc. And the thing is, that sounds simple, but there comes delays. Some publishers publish after the deadlines. And of course, self-publishing, like in our case, Kaya, doesn't always make the cut. And another, of course, the biggest issue is the monographic data. So when we think of a book, we know what a book is, largely. We're not going to get into that definition, but let's just say the people in this room, we have an image of what a book is. But with libraries, that's monographic publications. That means you have PhDs, you have textbooks, we found a report from a hunting lodge in the Ljubljana National Library, or the Slovenian one. We had Dungeons and Dragons information little packet booklet in Sweden that was counted as a monographic. So when we look at the library data, all the numbers are very much inflated in terms of trade publishing because it includes so much different content. Anyways, those are just a few of the things that you have to keep in mind when you're dealing with such a report. And it shows why trying to get this data is both a challenge and incredibly important to sort of get a clearer picture. Okay, and we're up to the numbers. So let's start with a small market. We are in a small market. We decided to count sort of everything under 10 million people as a small market. And this is the sort of our central hypothesis was that small markets, translations are a very sort of cultural and important part of that infrastructure. So at least 20% of the entire publishing output is or should be translation, according to our thesis. And it was confirmed, as you can see by this graph from 2021. I'm trying to get the pointy thing? I have the pointy thing. Okay. So over here you have Finland, which is, I'm going to be honest with you, it's 19.7%. But if you round it up, that's 20, so we can count that as confirmed. And it goes all the way up to 43% with Lithuania. And in between you have Slovenia, Slovakia, Greece sort of in the middle, around 30. Which shows the important role of translation in these smaller markets, both to connect to the larger global markets, and of course as a selling point. Now, as you can see, the differences are still quite big because it does depend on the cultural openness of the country, it depends on the local production, and of course just the general attitude towards reading. So let's get into a bit of the more specifics. Okay, we have 3 examples of small markets that we found very interesting that I want to talk about. Now, the first one is Slovenia, and we didn't just choose it because we're from there, although it was very easy to get the data because we could just walk to the library and bother them incessantly. But the thing is, it's a very stable market if you look at the graph. You can see we have between 5,300 and 5,900 books published every year. And the translation ratio sort of fluctuates between 29 and 32%. This is according to library data. It's a bit bigger if you discount all the PhDs and the textbooks. And the top 3 languages are also very stable. It's English, over 50%. It's been that way for a while. And German and French are about 8 to 10% each. But the thing that makes Slovenia an interesting example, and sort of a classic one, is that its location really affects the rest of the top 10 languages. So you have that global positioning between Central Europe and Southern Europe. I'm hoping everybody knows where Slovenia is. It's small, shaped like a chicken between Italy and Hungary. So, but yeah, because with the languages, you can see you have the Central languages, the Western European, and then you have the South Slavic languages, which is also sort of a representation of the old Yugoslavia. And the next example is a bit different because it's very cyclical. It's Bulgaria. Now, I'm not going to get into too much detail because I know you know these numbers, and I'm not going to repeat them to you because that would be silly. I just wanted to sort of show it as an example of how you have sort of that very up and down type of trend, where it's the same with general publication as well as the percentage of translations. In 2015-16, you had that rise, then it went down in 2019, and now it's going sort of a little bit back up again. And you have the same fascinating pattern with languages. English is at the top, it always has been, but Russian, French, and German, they sort of change depending on the year. So again, you have that cyclical nature in Bulgaria, which I found very fascinating for you. It is. Do you want to do the explanation now or later? A conspiracy. Do you want to tell me later? Okay, we'll discuss the conspiracies when we're off the stage. So meet us at the cocktail drink for conspiracy hour. No, and the final example is Catalonia. Now, we wanted to do Catalonia because we wanted one of those sort of smaller autonomous communities that has their own official language in a larger country. So we chose Catalonia in Spain because they have Institute of Ramon Llull, which is this very big organization that does incredible work in promoting Catalan literature and also in publishing their literature. And as you can see, this is a bit of a shorter slide, but they had the COVID dip in 2020, same as everyone, and then it actually rose to higher levels. So they went from about 5,000 before to about 6,500 now. And they're actually going more towards local production. So they used to have about 26% of translation, now it's fallen to 20%. But the thing that I find very exciting about Catalonia is that, well, English is the first source language. It's only about 34%. In Spain, or Spanish, has actually climbed from 26 to 30%, which means that if they keep going in the same trajectory in a few years, at least one country or autonomous speaking area is going to knock English off of first place. So fingers crossed for Catalonia, just for a little diversity in the reports. They also have, of course, French and Italian in their top languages. And in terms of a bit of a surprise, they have a lot of Scandinavian and Nordic languages as well in their top 10. So that sort of follows the bit of the Nordic crime trend. Okay, so the 4 main things that we can learn from these few small examples. First of all, translation is very much a big part of the structure with smaller countries in a way that is larger than with the large markets that we're going to talk about. The English language dominance is still prevalent, but I'm not going to talk about that. You'll hear about more of that later. And most of these markets are quite stable and resilient. Even like Bulgaria, when it goes down, it does always tend to come up. So there still seems to be a value of literature. And of course, cultural policy matters. Now, I already mentioned with Catalonia, Institute of Ramon Llull, or with Slovenian, we have the Slovenian Book Agency, which supports translation and translators both into the country and out of the country. So these types of exchange is very common in these small markets, as you probably know, and very useful. And now we cannot escape the large markets. I'm sorry, we have to take a look. Now, we chose Germany partly because our lovely colleague Rüdiger, who is here with us in spirit and the elephant in the room, He has this entire big slide because he's been tracking Germany for a while, and we have the data from 51 to 2021, actually. I don't know why it says 2020. I guess because it's a rounded number. But it shows how immediately, sort of after the Second World War, I keep losing this little dot, I'm sorry. It goes very much. It starts with about 15,000 books per year, and then it rises all the way up to nearly 68,000 books per year in the 80s. And then the highest peak was in 2007, when it was actually about 80,000 books. But then, of course, in 2007, in Germany, there was the whole economic crash. So after that, 2008, you can see it sort of slowly started declining. And one of the reasons that the German publishers think that is the case was also the overproduction that happened in the 2000s. So that is something I think we also need to look out for now, because of the overproduction in self-publishing that's sort of endangering our little traditional publishing models. And the thing that is interesting as well with Germany, the main source languages. Okay, so we have English at the top, of course, as predicted, over 50%. However, there has been a few changes. French used to be third, but it has been now replaced by, you wouldn't guess it, Japanese. So I think we're all familiar with this trend that's been up and coming, and I have to point it out with translation. The rise of manga and Nordic crime, but mostly manga. So Japanese is now a major translation source. In Germany, it's particularly driven by young readers. And it's also become very big in France. It's actually the second top source language in France, which makes sense because ever since the 30s, they've had quite a big fascination with the graphic novel. And manga is very much a continuation of that, just in the Japanese form. So manga is reshaping that sort of youthful habit of reading, which is fantastic. And it is also sort of bringing the translation rates a little bit up. So in Germany, that means the translation rates are now at about 13–14%, and they used to be 12 or even 10% back in the 50s, but that's a lifetime ago. The other thing that is also a little bit sort of a surprise, or was a surprise a while back, was the Nordic crime lift. So as we know, with Stieg Larsson in the 2000s, with Nordic crime and with the Millennium Trilogy, Swedish and a little bit Norwegian authors have become quite famous and quite well read around the world. Interestingly, it also went very much through France and then spread to the rest of Europe. And even now, that push continues, largely because of the television and film that is sort of that crossover success with the Nordic genre, establishing the Nordic crime as a subgenre in itself. And now our final market, Poland, another big market. It has about 38 million people. It's the 5th most populous state. And in terms of revenue, they have about 3 billion zloty per year. So in euro, that would be about 720 million euro. So to compare, Dutch publishers usually bring about 900 million euro, to give you a little bit of a look into that. And as you can see, over here we have the graph from 2005, because Poland joined the European Union in 2004. And we can see how radically that shifted sort of their production and their translation. It had a very big and very high rise once they joined the European Union. But then in 2019, it dropped quite a little, publication in general, but also translation. It went from about that whole 30–40% rise to 20%. And now it's actually going back up to about 26%. And wouldn't you guess what the reason is? It's mainly manga and romantasy. So it really shows how these modern trends and these TikTok trends that people sometimes scoff at, they're quite important for translated literature, because they're sort of rebalancing the scales in larger markets as well and bringing that statistic back up. And that was my little glimpse into the countries. Now in the report, there's many more countries, many more examples. That was just a little look through. But if you have any questions, of course, later we will answer. Then I hand it off to Miha.
Okay, I'll stand because otherwise I won't see the screen from that position. No, I'm not that old. I can survive standing. So the next, besides Rüdiger, there is one more elephant in the room, and that's global English. As you can see from this chart, we have, these are the percentages of English translations in a set of European countries, and you can clearly see that it's about 50%. And if we have in mind all what Anja said about the imperfection of publishing library statistics, this percentage is, as a matter of fact, much higher if we consider only books produced for sales on the trade book market. Because in this number of published titles here are also doctoral dissertations and so on. So I would say in all the countries there is about more than half translations coming from English, and I have very simple explanation why it is so. I mean, there are many explanations, but one simple explanation is that the easiest way to find a translator is to find a translator from English. It's much difficult. It's very difficult in Slovenia to find a translation from Bulgarian. There are about 2, or from Estonian. There is about half of one translator who speaks Finnish and a little bit of Estonian. So it's very difficult to translate from these languages. And from English, it's easy peasy. And one of the reasons why it is so is because there is a very high percentage of European population who can use English. European is a very multilinguistic continent, and we Europeans, by definition, speak a lot of languages. Here you see the Luxembourg, you have only 21% who say that they can have conversation in English, but problem in Luxembourg is that if you live there, you have to speak French, German, and very likely Flemish. So your brain capacity for languages is almost full, and there is no room for English. But if you live in Sweden, English is a natural choice for second language. Similarly, as in Luxembourg, for example, in Slovenia, we speak quite well the languages of our neighboring countries. We even become a kind of language behemoths after the disintegration of Yugoslavia, because before I could speak Serbo-Croatian, but now I can speak Serbian, Croatian, Montenegrin, and Bosnian, so 4 languages plus English. But you know, if we translate these numbers of people who can converse in English to a kind of book market comparisons, for example, we have 20% of Europeans who use English on a daily basis. And if we I'm talking about continental Europe, of course, and UK is out anyhow. So this makes that about 90 million of Europeans are using English on a daily basis. And if we change these numbers to a book market, that's bigger than UK. So there is one more Great Britain book market in Europe, in continental Europe, which is easily accessible by online book sales. And if we consider that those 47% of Europeans who can have conversation as a potential readers of books in English, that's about 220 million. That's almost like USA, I mean, without immigrants. So it's 2/3 of US population, so this is really huge. And this is quite an important thing to understand when we are analyzing local book markets. We know, for example, for Slovenia, that our book market is about 20% of our book market is in English. We don't know exactly how much, because a lot of people read e-books, English e-books, or buy books by online, so we don't have these numbers. But this is an educated guess from sales in the bookstores and some other data which we found out, which we gathered by reading surveys. But there is another thing which matters a lot, namely English. I mean, Trump can change the image of English quite a lot in next decade. But if this doesn't change, English has a huge future in Europe, because in Eurobarometer survey, which I got this data from, they found out that parents in Europe, 85% of them consider English as the most important language for their kids to learn. And their kids are following this, because about 70% of Europeans in the age 15 to 24 can speak English. So this means that this market will be growing. if something doesn't change globally. And I don't think that about English reading, even Trump cannot change these things. This is bigger than him. And when we did, by the way, a survey of reading habits of future teachers in Slovenian universities, we find out that about 1/4 of them are reading books only in English in their free time. They don't read in Slovenian. What, by the way, I think is quite dangerous because they're not practicing their language competence in their mother language, but that's another story. So another big question is, can AI change this? Because we have translation machines. And I did 2 small experiments. I used this text, which is with the permission of the author, because it's me who's the author of this paragraph. And I used ChatGPT to translate it to English, and then I used ChatGPT. I asked a friend I translated to Zulu. Why to Zulu? Because there is no connection between Slovenian and Zulu whatsoever. We were never colonizers of Africa. Actually, we were a colony of quite a few European forces, and Zulus never came to Europe to make their empire here. So there is no cultural connections between the 2 languages, and there is no document. There is not a single document existing that would be translated from Zulu to Slovenian. And then I sent the Zulu translation to my friend in Pretoria and asked her to translate it back to English, because I didn't want to use a contaminated computer for translation back, because the machine could learn something from my previous translations. And that's what I got. And you can see the basic text is my translation, and you can see the changes. For example, English translation couldn't stand the comparison between bicycle prices and print runs, because it was too complicated to grasp. It's too unusual comparison for a machine to grasp it. And when I was in Zulu translation, it also kicked out the bicycle bell, because it was even additionally too complicated. And but it added the podcasts to these sentences, to this sentence. What was quite right, actually. I forgot to mention podcast in these texts. And if you look at this final sentence, the machine in English didn't like the book-like comparison, and it changed it to books. And quite wisely, it changed. In Slovenian, I was here, the books are drifting around. I used an expression which says the books are loitering around. What is not, I mean, in English that would sound silly. In Slovenia, it doesn't sound so silly. But so it corrected me. The machine was quite politically correct when doing this. But then in Zulu, it cut out all this part of the text, because obviously it was not trained to translate all this. So my first point is that when the machine encounters something what is unusual, what is a unique creation of human mind, obviously this is a unique creation of human mind to compare bicycle prices and book print runs. I didn't think about this when I wrote it, but obviously it fails. And then I said, in poetry it will be even more radical. Ha, ha, ha. It was not. Because I machine translated a poem by a Slovenian author, and it did it quite well, actually. It even has some rhymes. The Slovenian original has some grammatical mistakes here, which the author did consciously, because he wanted to make the poem sound even a little bit more funny than it sounds now. But what is interesting is that I mean, you Bulgarians very likely understand that red and white colors have certain political colors, symbols from revolutionary times. Red is revolutionary and white is conservative. And in Slovenia, we have a lot of stupid discussions who won the Second World War and whether the reds and the whites are right and so on. Idiotic, but let's leave this aside. And then the machine, he didn't use here red and white, but it used left and right. And it even made a footnote. Oh, I changed once red and white to left and right because English readers will understand better if I do it like this. I was quite shocked. So, you know, it can do poetry. Obviously, this kind of poem has enough reference to do it, but when I did Zulu, something totally different came out. I mean, this is totally different poem. It has nothing to do with the original. Even the spirit and the mood of the poem is totally different. Why? Because I mean, when I asked ChatGPT, how did you train Slovenian and Zulu? And in Slovenian, he did quite correct answer. Oh, I looked all these tons of European documents in European Parliament, which are translated to all the languages, and the debates in the Parliament, which are translated to all the languages. I surveyed the web, and I also read some books which were available in some online very likely illegal libraries. And in Zulu, I surfed the web and I used Bible. So it was very, very different background, and this is the result. But the interesting thing is that, of course, in both cases, the machine used English as a kind of intermediary language, and there is a set of studies which analyzed how the machine translates, and they all find out that in most cases, when the machine is doing translations between some smaller languages, or even between big languages as Chinese and Russian, the machine is using English as an intermediary language, but not as a kind of a lexical intermediary, because the translations are not done word by word, but the machine is using English as a kind of semantic, conceptual, and syntactic intermediary. So as a result, the machine is selling us the structures of English language and the way how thinking is done in English through machine translations. So reading in English and reading a machine, you take 20 minutes. So I will take at least 15. Yeah. So the machine translations are somehow affecting the translations with English kind of mindset, let's say. But this is not all. I use this cat as a kind of to raise sympathy among the audience. It's one of the fattest cats in the Balkan, but it's not the fattest cat in the world, because the fattest cat in the world was Russian cat Kroshik. It has 27 kilos and it died. This one has only 8. I use this cat as a short introduction to this. Just this weekend, Bloody Kindle started to sell automatic translations of books. English to German, Spanish to English. And you know, it's, as we are in the year 3 of AI public use, we can expect that other languages will follow soon. And these processes, which I think very briefly described, will continue. We will think more on an English way than before if this continues. But even this is not all, and I will stop here. When I was in Lithuania 2 weeks ago, I asked the machine to paint this cat in the manner of Nikolajus Čiurlionis, who is the biggest Lithuanian painter from early 20th century, and it did this. And it's a politically correct machine, because in the picture the cat is less fat than in the original. But I think, you know, Čiurlionis would love this. Cat and the Moon, oil in canvas, 1920. But then, and I will finish with this here, I asked the machine, can you write the story about these 2 pictures? And it started to write a story which went very briefly like this. There was a cat living with a humble Slovenian professor and his wife, who was a writer. And then the cat discovered a time hole in the garden. And through this time hole, the cat went to Vilnius, to the early 20th century, where the cat lived with Giulioni's family. And once, when she returned from the time hole, she had blue and yellow color, like an Ukrainian fan. She had blue and yellow color on her paws, and the professor said, "Oh, did you visit our neighbor, the painter, and you begged him for the food again?" And then he asked across the garden the neighbor, "Was my cat with you?" And then the painter said, "No, but she has paint on her paws. Let me see." And then the painter took a look and said, "Oh, 100 years old paint." So, and the crazy thing is, and I never told this to the machine, I really have a neighbor who is a painter. I mean, he's a graphic designer, but he paints for hobby. And, you know, I mean, if an author would bring this to me, this kind of story, I would say, okay, it's a good idea, the language is a bit lousy, the ending is not okay, you need to change it, blah, 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 blah. But, you know, as I said, this is year 3 of artificial intelligence. And perhaps in 10 years' time, average translations at average authors will be doomed, because this kind of average stuff everybody will be able to do. But my guess is, and I stop here with this, my guess is that there will be a lot of work for people who will be able to do things which are above average, who will be able to think out of the box, which machines will not, the way of thinking which machines will not be able to simulate and grasp. And this means that people who will not offload their intellectual burden thanks to AI, but will upload more knowledge and more intellectual training, they will do great things. And of course, the big question is, what does all this mean for publishers? And my guess is, you know, the answer is very simple and quite stupid. It means that we will all have to work a lot with AI, but successful will be only those who will be able to work with humans too, with authors and with marketing books. Thank you for listening to me.